Well, tēnā koutou katoa. We will start with our karakia. Mike, would you do us the honour of opening our hui? Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Ai tika he tūwhera tātou hui te ahi ai nei i te kupu o tātou atua. E tō matarangi whakamoimiti a mātou hui ngai i tēnei haora. He iua mauri a mai tō aroha me tō mana i runga i a mātou. Tuko a mātou i te mahi i mua i a mātou i tēnei wā. Tiaki hoki a mātou whānau he noho ai te pauritanga, te māhui, te māmaitanga. Piki te kā, piki te ora, piki te māramatanga. Ko tēnei a mātou karanga te kia koe e pā. Kloatunga tapu mā ki tonu atu.
Tēnā koe. And welcome to our Regional Council meeting, 8th of March. And it would be remiss, as was alluded to in the karakia by Mike, our acknowledgement and condolences to those who have lost loved ones of recent, to those who have lost livelihoods, those who have lost their whare. So we do acknowledge all those of the region, 180,000 of our community members in this very tragic time. But moving forward into the recovery, this will test our resilience. But one foot in front of the other, we will get through this with kindness, with in a collaborative way that will see us become. Thank you, Leanne. And in saying that, we do have an agenda to move on to today, which takes us into an update that is on the agenda. But first, we have apologies from Charlie and Thompson. Can I please have a mover for that? And a seconder, so Zan and Yerif. Thank you. All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Do I have any apologies for leaving early? Thank you, Di.
Chair, I need to break out at 2:40 until 4 p.m.
Thank you very much. Notices. Are there any notices for today's meeting? There are none. Thank you. Any conflict of interest declarations? Moving on to the next item, confirmation of minutes from our last Regional Council meeting on the 25th of January. Can I move? And second, Yerif and Bake, thank you. All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. We do have a presentation from the staff, and as you come up, I'd like to officially thank our CE, Piri Munro, our executive team who have been part of the local and control group response, our management and all our staff who have absolutely taken on the challenge of the last 3 weeks. So we thank you and acknowledge the work that you have done so far. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. So, look, we've just got a high-level presentation here to go through some key points and impacts of the cyclone. Obviously, it's been devastating for Hawke's Bay, and all of the local authorities and others are fully responding with all of their resources to support the community through this. So what we thought we'd just go through between us all is just the size and the scale of the event, just recapping on the Regional Council's roles and responsibilities. We've got a little bit of data around the observed versus the predicted rainfall, and it was the most significant wet weather event in Hawke's Bay ever. got a little bit of high-level information about the extent of flooding and where that occurred, etc. So we'll just work through that as a team. So obviously, massive scale all the way from Northland down through Hawke's Bay. The damage from the cyclone was widespread and significant, triggered a national state of emergency, which I understand is the third time ever in New Zealand's history that's been declared. Our rainfall was well beyond what was forecast. Many of our stations, we received almost twice as much rainfall as that was forecast. And we had significant breaching of our flood control network in Heretaunga and also down in central Hawke's Bay. It's very important to understand the mechanism which led to those breaches. We literally had tens of kilometres of stop bank overtopped. Once a stop bank is overtopped, it undergoes erosion and then effectively is eroded away into a breach. And like all infrastructure, our flood control infrastructure is built to a standard. And for both Heretaunga and Central Hawke's Bay, that's a 1 in 100 year standard, with some locations such as Taradale recently upgraded to a higher standard. So that worked very well to save Taradale from any more significant impact.
Are we okay to ask questions, Chair?
Yeah.
Just on the rainfall one, so the rainfall combined with the wind, so if the rain is coming down at 45 degrees, then it's got a smaller piece of the measuring device to fit into, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right. So Ian can answer
So look,
that.
good, great question, actually. So we have both automated recorders out there, and we also have what we call catch cans, the old-fashioned containers that capture water, and they're called check cans, actually. And so we check the volume recorded in the can, and for those of you who have been in the backcountry, you may have seen those sort of big spherical containers with a funnel, upside down funnel in them. So the team have calibrated the automated samplers with what's in the catch can, and they by and large correspond. But you are right, is the view of the staff and the technicians who run these sites is that there is a risk of under-reporting because of the physics and the dynamics of water. So large amounts of rain, potentially higher, may have actually fallen that the device didn't pick up.
And just a reminder, a lot of civil defence centres were up and running, and in just understanding, I guess, the district councils really run that welfare support, and our role as the regional council is helping to support the GECC. So there's no duplication in terms of a lot of that welfare effort, which I think we've heard a few things in the community. Where is the regional council? Well, in terms of those welfare centres, that's very much led out through the district councils with the GECC, and that's on purpose, so we don't have everyone crowding that space. So here's just understanding under the national sedum, under the national sedum structure, where the responsibilities lie. And so the regional council is the administering authority for sedum on behalf of all the councils in Hawke's Bay. And sedum Group is the lead agency when we have a declared regional state of emergency, which is what we originally had. That then went into a national state of emergency, which meant that NEMA were leading the charge, and in fact many of the staff down at the GECC are now from NEMA, relieving some of the local council staff and the regional council staff in that centre. And that just goes through our obligations in terms of supporting the GECC. So it is significant for the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to support the GECC, particularly around the financial functions and just the volume of spending that has been occurring. And of course, all of the spending through the local civil defence efforts ends up in our books as the administrating authority for civil defence. So just a bit of a reminder of where everyone sits. Here's just some high-level information on the rainfall through from Monday to Tuesday, and this really supports what was forecast through Met Service and the sort of falls that we had on our rainfall sites, acknowledging that I think the rule of thumb is potentially a 20% under-report in those windy conditions. So plenty of significant rainfall in the Glengarry sort of area, which is up the top of the Esk catchment, Mangoni catchment. So some significant falls well beyond what was forecast. And so pretty much true throughout the catchment, but certainly some areas where almost twice the rain fell as was forecast. So some significant falls. That.
Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, so I'll let Ian talk to this one.
And just sort of on the rain data as well, you noticed on the slide that was those are 30-hour totals. And so what was also significant about the event was the intensity of the rainfall at its peak. So there was a period where there was very intense rain falling. And as this map, which probably hasn't replicated all that well on screen, indicates to you, it was very intense in some locations in the region. It was obviously higher than forecast, but incredibly intense in some parts of the region, particularly that Glengarry, Rissington, Esk part of the region. And what this is showing you is what we call a 24-hour return period. So this data incorporates the recent event as well. So if we took the recent rainfall out, the return periods are astronomical. And effectively what this is doing is giving you an indication of how likely these events are to occur over time. So rainfall in the purple dots would be expected based on a new rainfall record to occur 1 in every 400 to 500 years. So it has the chance of happening in any 1 year of about 0.2%. So very, very, very low probability of those events occurring at any one time. And that rainfall, as you can see, fell through that sort of Mangoni, Rissington, Glengarry, and into the Esk Valley area.
Just observe on that, but that's in a context, and you might see a number of that. On the face of things, the rainfall, coastal rainfall, is not so much, but what's missing from that story, and I'm not saying it's intentionally, but it's the background of a historically wet year on top of that. So the damage pattern, particularly in the hill country, is probably more than you'd expect from just the size of the 100 to 200 mils of rain in that coastal area.
Yeah.
And it's probably worth noting, look, we haven't focused on every aspect of this disaster. Certainly at our coastal communities bore the brunt as well. We had a high wave condition, we had a high storm surge, and we had the waves frequently overtopping some of the gravel barriers around Hamawana. We know that there's a property in West Shore that was flooded through the impact of the ocean, and there's work to do for us reinstating some of those shingle barriers. So in a normal sort of course of event, that would be a big deal for the Regional Council, but it sort of is just one of many things that's occurred across the whole region. This slide here just shows the extent of flooding in Wairua. So you can see the sort of Oxbow U-turn in the river there, and it's obviously burst out of its banks and crossed over through that North Clyde area, causing flooding in Wairua. And again, well beyond what we were predicting in terms of the impact on Wairua. There you can see there's some photos, so a lot of erosion on the banks, their new playground, they're obviously devastated, and also huge amounts of timber to be removed from around the place. So one thing that we're seeing in the community is a misunderstanding about whether the Regional Council has flood control in Wairua. We don't have a comprehensive flood control scheme in Wairua. The scheme is really a small maintenance scheme to deal with blockages and trees and things like that, and we have a number of drainage schemes in and around Wairua as well. So just if you're talking to anyone, we've had no failure or overcoming of flood control in Wairau because it's simply not there. Moving on. Obviously in Heretaunga, significant impact. Once again, the event clearly exceeded the level of service provided by our flood control infrastructure, and we had overtopping all through the network. Certainly, it is a tale of two rivers when we look at the Mangoni and into the Turaikuri. A lot of timber in the river, and when we look at the Ngararoro, we simply didn't have such large volumes there. So it did breach through Dartmoor. It breached into the middle there, that Pakawhai area, and significant flooding and impact, and we're still working our way through all of that. It's also severely impacted our drainage schemes. So some of our pump stations were in fact underwater, and the team have progressively brought them on, and we have all pump stations online, bar one at Brookfields, and we've got 40 diesel pumps deployed around the place, both pumping out ponded areas and also substituting for those pump stations. So I think at Brookfields there's like 10 diesel pumps in that location. One of the big areas that we're focused on is Awatoto, in getting that breach back as quickly as possible, so we don't have a reflooding. So absolutely devastating there, huge area impacted, and it will be a long road to recovery. Likewise, down in central Hawke's Bay, we had some breaching stop banks around Waipawa and some flooding in Waipawa, and we also had a significant breakout down at Walker Road into the Papanui, and you can see that in the lower right-hand corner. And we do have a photograph of the ponded area. So a significant ponded area created there, many tens of hectares of land. And at one stage, we were very worried about our State Highway 2 and flooding of State Highway 2. So there was a big effort to curtail that breakout over Wednesday, Thursday, I think. So once again, significant impact to those landholders and their operations. So just to cap on some of the wider, so as recognised, as Hinawai was opening the meeting, tragically, the loss of life is associated with this flood, and so we need to understand, what can we improve, what can we do better, knowing that these types of events may occur again. So there will be a review of the scheme and a review of our monitoring network and how that responded to the event. We know that we've got a significant impact with housing, and there's some pretty big numbers on an already very busy housing market. And again, the various government departments are sort of leading into that space. And we've seen absolutely massive damage to our state highways, to our bridges, culverts, roads and rail, power. And so all of those agencies, through the Civil Defence and through the Lifeline Utilities Coordinator, there's a huge amount of effort gone into coordinating, getting everyone back up and running.
So Chris, just
Yeah.
in regards to the review that will take place,
Yep.
do we kind of have a rough idea of that time frame of when it may occur?
Yeah, so I'm going to frame this as there's two reviews that are likely to happen. So what with the review we're talking about is more of an infrastructure review or a scheme review. How did the scheme respond, and are there improvements that we can implement into building back better? And so it's the notion of, if we have an over-design event, how can we configure the flood control so that it behaves in a known a known way. And that may require diversion into certain areas of land, and there's lots of options we need to look at. It'll also look at the flood warning network and how that performed, and some of the backup communication. So we lost a lot of that network as the event was unfolding, and that meant that we were unable to see what was happening within the network without physically being there. So that's the review I'm talking about, and undoubtedly there will be a government review of some sort looking at the role of the government agencies and how it unfolded across multiple regions. So we're not going to get into that space, but certainly kick off as soon as we can that scheme review, which will inform our building back better.
And do we intend to have any independence, perhaps peer review or whatever the case may be?
So absolutely. So for a scheme review, we would typically have a appropriate consultant to do that work, and then we would have that peer reviewed by another appropriately qualified consultant. There is a significant effort for staff, because to set up that scheme review, we need to make sure all the information about the scheme is correct, and the consultant is aware of all the intricacies of that scheme. So there is a level of independence, and there's also that third party scrutiny as well through a peer review. And we want to kick that off as soon as we can, particularly when we look at potentially looking at land use going forward, so we can inform some decisions around that. But there's a few different things going on there. It's hard to get all the timing to line up perfectly.
Yeah, and perhaps just to add to that, in terms of the network and the monitoring system, we're actively looking to recruit an independent person right now to conduct that review for us. Do it as soon as we can.
So what we're doing, we've been really busy. The really positive thing is, staff have really kicked in, and some staff, it's almost been their sole focus for the last 3 or 4 weeks to respond to this event. And we were very aware about the concern that the community would have with the number of breaches around any future rain events, sort of replaying out some of those floods. So we built what we would call the rapid repair team. We've got 13 pods, which are self-contained teams to make decisions on site. So we have 13 of those out at about 20 locations, working through that. We've already finished a number of those, and we'll see that on a slide. And we've spent a lot of time through aerial photography and reconnaissance understanding what those critical areas are for repair. And in most locations, we've put a temporary bunding in place to deal with some of those smaller level events while the permanent work is done. Through Ian's team, a massive effort there, getting all of those 113 monitoring sites up and running, no mean feat. And we've also been working with our pump stations, and some of those are just working manually and working off generators. But the key thing is those pump stations are now almost all operating. The big challenge we have is the amount of silt in our drains, and some of our drains have been desilted now 4 times, and the silt just keeps on coming. So it's not one of those things you do once. We have to keep up that effort. Look, a huge focus on waste disposal, and certainly taking a coordination role. Still more work to do, particularly around silt, but some success around animal carcasses. And Katrina will talk to that in a bit more detail on another slide.
Chris or Ian, the monitoring sites, where they failed and they're replaced, do you put it further up the bank? What happens there?
Yeah, well, Ian can speak
So
to that.
what the team have done is just get the network operational again. So effectively in some places, structures where our equipment have been attached to structures like bridges, which have now gone. And so they've literally just cantilevered PVC pipes out to put radars across the water. So we've got an interim solution to get them operational. Then we'll go back and make more permanent solutions once we've got the network operating. And there was only one site to go. I think it was in the Hangaroa and the Ruakaturi, and the team are working on that today. So they've worked almost 7 days a week to get the network back up and running. It's not the final solution, but at least we've now got eyes on these systems.
Chris, just wanted to ask about public communication around this suite of activities. We've been pretty good, I think, so far in communicating around those absolute key priorities around the repair of the stop banks. There's quite a list there, and other organisations have been quite good at getting into the mode of giving regular updates, roading, for example. I'd like to give, for us to give some thought about getting onto a regular program of updates on some of these key things. For example, when can we get into the dog park? That's not the highest priority, but have a little bit more clarity around that for people.
Yeah, look, and I think that's a great point, Zan, and that's where we'll be moving through with our comms. And, for example, Unison do a great job of providing those maps of sort of where their work front is moving to. And so you're exactly right. That's what we need to do. There will be a short-term focus on getting our regional parks at least partially open, so people can start enjoying those areas. There are some significant impacts to our cycle network, and we do want to keep the people away from our construction sites. We've got heavy machinery moving around on those sites, so we are asking the public to sort of respect those closure signs, particularly a lot of the on the stop banks along the Turaikuri and Ngararoto rivers are particularly impacted. And certainly Disaster Relief Trust, as Susie was, do you want to talk about that quickly?
So that was obviously successfully reset up on the very early on with the initial seeding of the government contribution of $1 million. The public and globally actually have been hugely supportive, and the trust at the moment just has just under $3 million in that. We have successfully today sent out our first batch, for use of a better word, of applications, so that will provide relief. We will constantly do that now over a period of time, reviewing and making payments on a weekly basis. We are strongly encouraging the public to apply for that. We are fully also aware that some isolated communities may not have access to be able to apply. We are super conscious about that, and we are holding or being very careful about the allocations that we make to ensure that there is longevity for those who can't get there immediately, but who will need it in the next few weeks.
And just also acknowledging that at any one time, 10 or 15% of our organisation are in the GECC supporting that function in Hastings.
And just for clarity, Group Emergency Coordination Centre in Hastings.
Yep.
Lots of acronyms that are new.
Yeah.
We'll just have some questions. Neil and then Tanya on the screen.
Yeah,
Thanks, Neil.
Chris, this is probably a question for you, and it's to do with the extensive damage to the flood protection network and the various factors that have contributed to that. Can you just give us a quick overview as to the modelling that you use to assess the effectiveness of the flood protection, and what risk assessments are completed as a part of that, if you like, assessment? Perhaps comment on, for example, the vegetation coming down the system, the bridges in the way, etc. Are they part of your risk assessment? When was the last one done? I think there's a 3-year survey from memory of the system that you institute. Can you help us with that process?
So at a high level, there's quite a few parts to that question. So the 3-yearly refers to the gravel surveys. So a key part of maintaining our schemes is to ensure that we don't have the build-up of gravel within the network. And so we survey that on a 3-yearly basis around the rivers, and that provides us the program around ensuring that we have sufficient capacity within the scheme for those peak flows. The other one is, in terms of the our edge protection. So the trees that we have within the network are very important. They are called edge protection, and they are there to control the velocity of water out on the edges so that it decreases the potential of erosion of the stop banks. And that was heavily impacted, and we know in some locations a large proportion of the timber found in a pile is actually our edge protection, being willows and poles. One of the things that we observed through the event was the beaver dams, or the damming against bridges, and that also contributed to some of the issues and some of the breaches we had in stop banks. So in terms of near EIT, we had that with that bridge which eventually went in, and we also saw it at Omahu against the Fernhill Bridge there as well. So that's something we're taking forward to understand the height of those bridges in relation to our scheme assets. And we've already had discussions with Hastings District Council about when they're looking to build those bridges back, that we're actually working together on the future of what the flood control scheme might look like, so that we can work together for an optimal solution. In terms of risk and risk assessments, we did do a lot of work on how we were phrasing our risk assessment, and there's a lot of discussion, and it was really around recognising the fact that any engineered solution has a standard that it's built to, and there is a risk that the level of service is exceeded by an event, and that wouldn't necessarily be regarded as a failure of the infrastructure. It's just a condition of the infrastructure and part of the decision-making process around what is the level of service you want to provide to your community and how that is funded.
If I could just follow on, Madam Chair, just on that point, would it be fair to say we did make an assessment of the likely vulnerabilities to the system that recognised that these things could happen? Is that something that's...
So you are correct. So it's worth mentioning Council did make a decision back in 2015 to upgrade the Herotonga scheme to a 1 in 500 year level of protection. One of the challenges with that was funding, and through COVID we worked with government to provide some funding for that purpose. And part of that process is to really do a risk assessment of the impact of failure of various locations. And so that drove our works program, and the number one risk area was Taradale, and that was subsequently the first project that we did. And if you look up at Motio, that's another area that we were finalising the consents before commencing that work. And we also did some work up around Ngātarewa in the upper Nararara River. So part of what we do in terms of looking at upgrades is prioritising based on, population, where people are living, lifeline utilities, and etc. So that's the process we use there.
And as a consequence of that action, tens of thousands of houses were not impacted to the same extent, and potential loss of life could have been vastly more than it actually was.
So I believe that is correct. Even though the Taradale Stop Bank was built to a 1 in 500 year level of protection with freeboard, it was slightly overtopping in places. That's why the evacuation was called for Taradale. But thank goodness that the flood started receding at that time, and you are correct, if we had had a breach in Taradale, that would have impacted the whole of the suburb, and we would have had even more of a catastrophic outcome than we already have had.
Thank you. Tanya.
On mute, Tanya.
Oh, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about the noise in the background. There's some construction workers just upstairs. So thank you for the updates. I noticed we didn't have in any of the slides an overview of what happened in the Esk Valley or Tangoil, where there was loss of life in the Esk Valley. Did I miss that? But I didn't think I saw that in the slides that were shown.
Yeah, so we haven't covered every aspect, so that's correct. We're still working on the detail of a blow by blow time-stamped communication activity, and that will all come out in the fullness of time. And I guess the other purpose of this was not to convey the totality of the event, but there is a focus on the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's assets and actions, and both in the Esk Valley and the Tangoil Valley, we do have schemes in those valleys. They provide a very low level of protection. In the case of Esk, the level of service provided is a 1 in 2 level of service, and it has a budget of about $7,000 per year, I believe. And again, it's stream maintenance. So I guess we will go into all of those details in the fullness of time, but we also wanted to provide councillors with an overview of some of the key impacts and key actions, acknowledging that loss of life has occurred in those locations.
Okay, so I guess what I want to come back to is what is our responsibility as the Hawke's Bay Regional Council in flood-prone areas such as the Esk Valley and Tangoil, which are known to have flash floods, which have had significant flooding. I appreciate your comment, I think it was Ian, that we're talking about a 0.2% probability for the places that had the big purple dots on that slide you showed earlier, but that includes the Esk Valley and Tangoil. And I'm mindful that I know Tangoil Marae and MTT have done a lot of work around flood risk in the Tangoil Valley, and we know about the flood. We know that we've had the 1938 Anzac Day flood, we've had the 1988 Bowler flood, and now 2023 Gabrielle cyclone. Even though we say 0.2%, that's not what has actually happened in terms of those floods. And the evidence we've got from our whānau around the Anzac Day flood, and I think there's photos floating around in Hawke's Bay Regional Council of the amount of silt was up to 3 metres, so 9 feet, which is significantly more than what we're seeing in Tangoil Valley or possibly even the Esk at this stage. So I'm just underlining how vulnerable those valleys are. And my first question is, what is our role as HBRC in terms of those areas where there's been loss of life, where we don't have much in the way of schemes or resources there? What is our responsibility there?
So I think our responsibility, firstly and foremost, is to point out the hazard profile of those locations, and that is precisely what we've done in the past. One of the challenges that we have as the Regional Council is we provide advice to people or developers, and we are not the deciding authority on what should occur in some of those locations. And for example, there is a development in Tangoil. The Regional Council provided advice that the development should not go ahead. And my understanding is that went to the Environment Board and that development was allowed to proceed. So our obligation is to provide that advice. We provide a lot of mapping as well, but we are not the deciding factor in every land use. Beyond that, we do have a role to work with the community around flood protection, and our approach has been that those schemes are funded by the communities that those protect. And very often we end up in situations where the community has a desire to be protected from flooding, but there's an affordability issue. And it is fair to say with regards to Wairoa, after Bowler, there was a flood scheme designed, The discussion was had with the and there was affordability issues around that scheme, and so it wasn't implemented. So I think when we look through, I think the regional council has done a good job in pointing out those hazards, has done a good job in protecting the community. However, there comes questions around affordability, and that's some of the discussion we're going to have going forward with the Crown and government around how people the land use in some of these high risk locations, and where there is a engineering solution that's part of the toolkit, how that is funded.
Thank you. Can I just follow up with a couple of questions there, Madam Chair?
Sure.
I know the beach development, and I know I spoke with Hawke's Bay Regional Council hydrologists and engineers quite some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when that was first going through in terms of subdivision. I know that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council did oppose that subdivision at Tangoil Beach, but we, as HBRC, we didn't appeal the decision. My understanding is it didn't go to the Environment Court. It wasn't appealed by HBRC. So that's a particular case, but I suppose is the authority that is there for management of rivers, waterways, we as HBRC should be more perhaps active with the territorial authorities in terms of where they're looking to consent developments. There's another development proposed that might actually be consented down at Whirinaki, which, as we know, was massively flooded. That's for 80 homes, not yet built. That seems like madness to me. So, yeah, I'm just raising that these are places where people have invested their money in businesses, also in homes, and marae, Tangoil marae was massively impacted. Being a scheme that people can't afford doesn't seem very equitable to me. So I'm raising that as an issue that we must address as the council. Yeah, must address.
Thanks, Tanya. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I had a question that really leads from where Councillor Curtin was a moment ago when you're talking about modelling of risk. Excuse me. And prefacing the question, I'd firstly like to just acknowledge the incredible heroic efforts of our communities who were at the coalface of the immediate response before our staff could get there to help them. And Esk Valley, Dartmoor, Wairoa, Waiheke, whatever it might be. But the question that we've all heard raised when we talk to those people, as we all have, and been onto their properties, is related to causation. And I'm not sweeping in any particular industry here, I'm making a general point. What do you say to those people who we've spoken to who firmly believe that the effects of the flood and the damage to our stock banks had as much to do with wood as it did with water? Any thoughts about that?
So I think it's very early to say, and I think we need to understand some of the sources of that wood material, and so I think there's some work that needs to be done before we can fully answer that question. But without doubt, there is a lot of wood and some significantly sized, whole trees a long way inland, and yeah, I think we just need to work through that. But you can see for yourself, I think, at some of the bridges, the damming, etc., that it caused. But I think we just need to think that's quite a big question to answer.
That's part of the review, presumably, is it?
And well, it'll be in terms of the scheme review. I think if we want quick answers, we need to look quite tightly at the scheme. There are broader land use issues, and also just what happens in these massive events as well.
But without getting into that, if you run a 100 model or a 500 model,
yeah.
Are you modelling water running down rivers, or are you modelling water and wood running down rivers?
So I think there's some learnings there. We would have not modelled the volume of wood coming down the river. And I think that's something perhaps the whole industry will pick up on as a potential learning out of this event.
Just going to that, sorry to interrupt. In the model, did the effects of the bridges, etc., running across the flood path, is that modelled as well? We heard that the wood wasn't modelled, but were the impediments to flow modelled?
So I'd need to look at the model specifically to answer that. But generally, where there is a high level of clearance between the modelled event and the bridge, it wouldn't be a concern. Where there are, where it forms the shape, so in terms of the abutments of the bridges, they would be fully incorporated into the model where they change the cross-sectional area of the river there. So I think in part they are, but I think it's fair to say that the level of damming through the sheer volume of wood is not part of the modelling process.
Di.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations, all the enormous amount of work that you and all of your teams have been doing. Just following on from Councillor Williams' comments, can we expect to see HBRC in the rivers cleaning out that wood and cleaning that wood off those bridges?
So absolutely, there's two parts to that question. So one is under a business as usual model, the responsibility for clearing wood away from bridges lies with the bridge owner. So that's the model that is traditionally done in times of BAU. At the moment, in different locations, there are different amounts of different timber. And so we are where that needs to be removed so we can urgently repair the stop banks. The Regional Council is doing that. And in other locations, there might be a case put forward for others to remove that timber as well. But certainly if the bridge is at risk, either the bridge owner or the Regional Council can act to remove that material. The risk, of course, is how all of this is funded, and so I want the councillors to be fully aware that when it comes to our waste stream disposal, there's still significant uncertainty on how that's to be funded, and we just need to be responsible with our decision making going forward. Ultimately, there needs to be clarity within the community, but everyone needs to do their fair share of the clean-up. We will be cleaning timber out of our scheme areas probably for a year. There's substantial amount, but private landowners have responsibilities and other agencies have responsibilities as well. So it's a shared, it's an activity that needs to be shared, but we will do everything we can to particularly protect bridges and to protect assets.
Is this our final slide,
No, it's not.
Chris? No.
It's not.
I
We
think
got into a lot of questions
we'll
there.
continue on with the presentation and have the questions at the end.
This is hard to see, but it effectively shows the red is where the breaches have occurred. And the one on the left is the Heratonga scheme. The one on the right is the Upper Tuki scheme in Central Hawke's Bay. So we won't pour through that. But as you can see, particularly Dartmoor, Puketapu area, significant breaches on both sides into Motio. And again, Twyford impacted and breaches around Omahu, obviously pouring into that Pakawhai area. This just gives you an idea of the quantum of repairs on some of our more significant infrastructure. So what I'm presenting isn't all of the damage, it's simply some of the more significant damage. In terms of breaches, about 5.5 kilometres, and in terms of weakened stop bank, about just under 26 kilometres. So, that's in the tens of millions of dollars of repairs. And we've got them all there by river. And the rebuild work stream. So this is just to show you all the areas we're working. And in fact, Allen Road, Taradale and Maraenui Golf Course are now complete. and as those pods complete that work, they'll move on to some of those other areas. So about 160 people all up working on that work stream. And I might just hand to Katrina just to walk you through some of our waste stream information.
Okay, so we've stood up a team in the Regional Council from across the organisation to deal with waste. As Chris noted, it is a significant issue with this event for which we have no funding currently. So I am working with the Ministry for the Environment on options for that. I am leading, chairing a regional waste group that meets regionally, meets weekly, so that we can try to collaborate and coordinate our efforts a lot more as we work through from response to recovery that is getting better. Our initial response was about animal carcasses. So you can see the number of sheep carcasses there that we have collected and disposed. 8,000, between 5 and 8,000. It was difficult to calculate. There were other animals as well that were collected. Many landowners dealt with it themselves if they were particularly large rural areas. We have taken a large portion to a contaminated site, and then the rest were buried in pits. I'll skip over silt for just a minute and come back to that. In terms of wood waste, Di, in particular to your question, we are actually collaborating on the collection of wood. So Napier City Council in particular cleared you will have seen now large amounts collected off the foreshore here, and also as we cleared out Awatoto, that was placed on the foreshore, and that wood is gradually being taken away to Whakatu, where we have what is called a hog that is essentially chipping all of that into wood chip. And there are currently others operating around the region doing the same thing that are privately owned. In particular, there's one I know, Poketapu, that is currently operating as well. We are, in terms of wood waste, through the Wairoa connection, connected into the review of Slash, and we have had staff members up with those panel, or with the team that has been pulled together to do that investigation. They were up in a helicopter yesterday looking at all of our forested areas, both in Hawke's Bay and Wairoa and Tairāwhiti yesterday. So it is a long process. Obviously, it's going to be a long process. There is a lot of wood, and you'll note we are calling it wood waste. As Chris noted, there are significant large trees, root ball and all, that have come. We have contractors from Gisborne right through actually processing those logs. And certainly in the breaches in Poketapu, Chris and I observed trailer loads of logs being taken out. Sunpine, makrokapa, willow, all sorts. So that is ongoing. In terms of, and I'm going to put together the silt and the post and wire. So essentially what we have largely in orchards is the flood as it's gone through has picked everything up, and in some places that has combined all the waste into what is sort of like a bird's nest of waste, and others it hasn't. We've had some landowners that have piled it all up into piles, and the region just does not have capacity in a landfill to deal with all of this. Omaranui, we are working very closely with Hastings District Council. They are about to open up a new face of Omiranui. They're also reopening a face that we closed some time ago because due to settling, there is capacity there. So we are working really closely with them on that. The TLAs and that sort of waste stream that's there, the TLAs, of course, are collecting all the household waste and separating out whiteware. Obviously, we don't want whiteware dumped to landfill, so that is being separated out. And what the TLAs are doing is using what's called a mulching machine. And so it essentially chunks up the waste, couches, or whatever else it is. You throw it in, it mulches it up and compacts it to much smaller volumes. But in speaking with Hastings District Council's Omiranui operators today, they are receiving 200% more waste than they had ever budgeted for in terms of capacity. So there is a significant issue that this region needs to come to grips with in terms of recovery on what we do with waste. And if we are simply going to dump it all to landfill, we will run out of room very quickly. So with the agreement of Councillor Van Beek, which we appreciate greatly, we did a 48-hour trial on his property on how can we separate and reduce waste. Look, we learnt a lot. You'd argue the effectiveness of that trial, but it taught us what we can and can't do. The challenge that we have is around, so we can recover posts, and we really need to. They are tannalised, and so we don't really want to be disposing of those posts. Certainly we can't chip them because we don't want to mix that wood waste. The challenges around that sort of what we're describing as the bird nest mess, which is the wire, the netting, the post, and all of that. So we are working on options for that, and we certainly intend to bring that to council hopefully next week with some options around that. Certainly working with ministry officials. In terms of the silt, it is significant, as we all know. We are working collaboratively with particularly Napier City Council and Hastings District Council, which have the worst affected areas. Between us all, we have sites for silt collection and disposal. And what we're trying to do is work together on those sites so that we are not crossing over the region to get to our own sites. We're also working on having sites that large contractors or large operators who can deal with it themselves can take to site, as opposed to the smaller operators who can't and will need collection. So where you're a smaller operator, particularly in the rural environment, what we're asking is that landowners get that into a collection point, and then contractors, our regional council contractors, will collect that and take it to site. There are some large landowners who already have all of the equipment to deal with that themselves, and so those are sites that we are trying to locate or identify, and we think we've got them now, where they will be able to simply take it off the land and take it to site themselves. That leaves the residential gap. So residential homeowners in town who have issues of silt, and the TLAs currently are not collecting or not intending to collect silt from residential areas. They don't have capacity to do so, and it comes back also to cost. So we are working on silt every day to try and come up with a plan for the region. Chris tells me that, interestingly, before the flood, this region had a real shortage of silt. It has got commercial value, not huge amounts of commercial value I'm expecting, but just it does have value as a product. There's lots of talk about the silt being contaminated. We have done testing samples of around the region of the silt. It is not contaminated. And so we need to not give people the fear that somehow it's largely contaminated and they have to be careful about, touching it. There is the potential in some places that it might have effluent or biomatter in there. And so that is the caution that people do need to take with it and should be careful when they are working to make sure they clean their hands and wear protection. The area that we do have contamination is Awatutu, and that is significant. Napier City Council are the lead with that, working with the Ministry for the Environment, working with WorkSafe, and that is another issue that we will need to work with going forward on that. So that's really where we're at the moment. There are no quick answers, and that's the frustrating thing. If this was just land that we were dealing with, I think that would be different, but we are also dealing with people's homes. So those people that have lost homes and their production land, there's a real psychological issue, and there's a real burden there for them trying to understand what their next steps are and how they move forward, and we understand that. So we're trying to work as quickly as possible as we can.
Katrina, do we have any further slides?
Funding?
I don't need to talk to these. It was just acknowledgement of the rules in terms of welfare costs. They are significant for us. They are also reclaimable from the government through NEMA. But I do want to be clear with everyone that in instances we've spoken about today, waste, etc., being one, clearing of sites to get to some of our assets are not claimable under some of the rules. But this will be significant for us, and we will be left with costs that aren't claimable that unfortunately will be a burden for HBRC.
Busy.
Go through the next.
Can I just say,
So
Katrina,
that's-
that was really, really helpful on that waste. That overview painted a very clear and helpful picture, and I hope some of our communities get to see and hear that. I understand there'll be some more comms tomorrow with some more definitive information about
Yes.
silt specifically.
Yes, there will be.
So Chair, that was it in terms of the
that was it?
presentation. Happy to
Okay.
answer any questions.
Yeah, so Jock?
Actually, Chair, we've spoken a bit about communication to the public generally, and actually a lot of the stuff you've got there is exactly the sort of stuff that would be good in the public domain. So I feel that for a lot of us who can get out there and chat to a Rotary Club or whatever, ironically, a lot of the key messages that I had suggested to Mike were in fact covered off, key themes for slides were covered off with what you had. So, adaptation of that would be pretty good.
Sam?
Kia ora, Chair. Question for Katrina, I think. So, and just an observation, look, I know that this is extremely challenging for landowners. The whole area of waste, mixed waste in particular, is highly challenging. And I appreciate that you're moving with pace, and we're all, I think, aiming in the same direction to get joined up across local government, but also hopefully across the affected industries to have a joined up response to this, and that's work in progress. There's one particular area that I just wanted to flag of the many that I could raise, but the issue that comes up quite frequently is around funding for self-service. So at the moment, we've essentially issued what could be construed as a blank cheque for the regional council to pick up, to come to site in the rural and lifestyle areas and pick up silt and wood waste and mixed waste. As you pointed out, Katrina, some operators are in the position of doing this for themselves, and we're trying to create the infrastructure around those disposal sites to facilitate that. The question of whether they're doing it for themselves, some recompense for that cost, which otherwise the council at the moment at least is underwriting. So you may have an answer for that today, or it may be one of the many things that hasn't been resolved yet, but I think it's an important issue to consider.
Absolutely. So as Susie pointed out, we cannot recover the costs of waste disposal, and I accept that if we are offering to collect silt, then how do we, where's the fairness in all of that? This is not indefinite, and we've certainly set this up somewhat as a trial until April. We haven't written a blank cheque for anyone. We have issued contracts for the disposal of animal waste, which has come to its conclusion, and we have issued contracts for the disposal of wood and silt. Primarily, that was to deal with our own assets first and foremost, so getting the wood off the stock banks and out of the rivers where we needed to get work, and public spaces. Understand totally that looks like we are, and potentially it could be that we are favouring those who can't deal with it themselves as opposed to those who can. I don't really have an answer to that. It is what it is. We don't have any funds at all to recompense anybody else or anybody to clear their land. And we are working with the Ministry for the Environment to try and get some funding for that.
Can I just say, Chair, just for the sake of absolute clarity, at the moment, our communications with those landowners is that we will pick up. If they get that to a site, or in the case of concentrated waste that's already there, as in flood paths, council will come. If we are changing that, there's a whole lot of issues to be considered about where we move from our current stance and our current promise to what the future might look like. I don't have an answer, but it is a major question.
Councillor Harding, as I said, we have at this point in time said that we would collect. We are going to continue to do that as long as we can, but it is limited funding that we have. Well, in fact, we don't have funding. In terms of residential land or where there is a dwelling, EQC, where somebody is insured, will assist with the cleanup of silt within 20 metres of their property.
8 metres and 60 metres of a driveway.
So that's not what I've heard from the residential, but I'll take your word for it.
I can confirm that. It's 8 metres.
So we've, so we don't intend to step into that space.
I'll go Tanya and then Sophie. Kia ora, Tanya.
Kia ora, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Katrina. Just can I clarify, I had a couple of questions and they'll be very quick. Katrina, can I just clarify the removal of silt by HBRC, does that include at Tangoil and Esk around those residential properties that are there?
No, at this point in time, we have said that challenge is too difficult for the regional council to undertake on its own. We would need help from central government if that was intended to be done.
Most of those homes in Tangoil don't have insurance, so that they won't be eligible by EQC either. The thing I just wanted to ask too was coming back to Chris and the question around whether we take woody debris into account when we do our modelling. As I understand, we don't. But in terms of the inquiry that we might do or the investigation that we might do as it relates to our own assets, we must take woody debris into account, surely. Our assets are as much impacted by woody debris as others. So wouldn't that be an obvious, that one?
Correct. So what I said is we would take that into account with the review. Question was around historic practice and those volumes. So my understanding is historically we haven't modelled those sorts of volumes, but obviously, yes, it's a learning for us to take forward, and that's precisely what we'll be doing.
Okay, my last question, thank you for bearing with me, is I'm not sure who this is to, but the question around warnings, HBRC doing our job to warn people about flood hazards. My understanding is in the Esk Valley, I know one of the people who were trapped in their roof and lost one of their friends through the flood. they got a warning around 4:30 in the morning via text. I don't know if it came from HBRC or CDM or whomever, that they needed to evacuate, but they were already in their roof, and that was 4:30 in the morning. And I'm not sure that our Tangoil whānau received any warnings. So again, in these areas that are high risk if we have flash flooding, who is it that is giving these warnings? Is it HBRC? Whose responsibility? And I'm not a heat-seeking missile here. I just think we narrowly avoided a lot more deaths, particularly in Tangoil, because whānau ended up trapped in their homes with chest-high water and couldn't get out. So I'm worried about what happens tomorrow if we have another cyclone coming our way. Who warns and when do they warn? And can they do it as a precautionary thing like we did the Friday when we had some heavy rain following the cyclone?
So Tanya, it's Ian here. Perhaps I'll help answer that question. So the warnings or alerts that you described are what we call emergency mobile alerts, and so they're issued through the Civil Defence Centre GCC. So they're the only handful of people who can issue those alerts, and the alerts were in that instance to evacuate. And I guess the challenge with those alerts is they work off cell towers. So basically you pick cell towers to send the alerts to, and then it's a very coarse distribution of who picks it up. So it'll spread out kind of across the network that's connected to that cell tower. So that's how the warning occurs. And the warnings are issued on the basis of either known or predicted information that sits in front of the controller at the time. So in that instance, going into the event, there were areas that were identified as being at risk based on the forecast provided and the rainfall information provided. They were proactively notified and evacuated. As this presentation has highlighted, the rainfall that actually fell vastly exceeded that was forecast, and the flooding occurred. And at the time that it was occurring, those alerts were issued at whatever time they were in the morning as the situation was unfolding. So areas that were known to be prone to flooding, particularly in the Esk Valley from previous events, and based on the information at hand, were proactively notified and asked to move by police and Fire Emergency New Zealand on the night before.
The night before, you're talking about Monday night?
Yeah, for those known areas. And then as the event unfolded, like I said, the emergency mobile alerts were issued at various stages during the night or during the morning.
Yeah.
The morning.
Sorry, Ian, would you mind just running through that again, please? So there was an evacuation notice issued the night before?
Yeah, there were parts of the East Valley that were asked to evacuate.
And subsequent to that, you've got your EMS, the alert system was triggered, correct? Were there any, and then door to door, you're saying with police and
the night before, yes.
That's not well understood.
Of course, the other thing, I guess the other piece of context to put across this, and I think it's a learning for the nation. Look, we had commentators across the media dumbing down the significance of the event that was coming towards us. So people were sort of given a false sense of security around it. There were a number of warnings across a range of agencies and media about the approaching cyclone that probably is likely were not given the heed that they should have been by people. So I think this is going to reset acutely the public awareness of approaching weather events.
So Ian, just adding to that, so did this organisation, prior to Tuesday, so Monday evening, did you give a warning to your staff?
I can comment on that. So we work very closely with the forecasters, and we all the time respond to rain watches and rain. And so what happens is typically we would talk to the forecaster to get an understanding, and we also receive basically a synthetic rainfall approximation. And then our engineers work with those synthetic rainfall forecasts to predict the response of the catchment. And in this instance, we did all that, and our assessment was that the cyclone would test our infrastructure, but it would be within the level of service. And that was the message given to councillors as part of the briefing prior to the event. And as part of that, we identified that there were houses in the Esk Valley that were at risk, and they were evacuated the night before.
Including the school, the girls' school.
So the real issue is we can only work with the information we have, and we have to have some realistic boundaries of, of not always assuming this really bad outcome. And so we will learn from this, but so everyone knows, we talk to the forecaster, we get the forecast, we model.
So it's basically what Ian was saying, that people receive information, take information differently.
Yeah.
So I know for one of the organisations I worked, we took it seriously. We sent our staff home early with the instructions to prepare for the cyclone.
And I think there are many lessons that come from this, but that is one that I think the nation needs to really on board, is preparedness for these events and taking seriously messages that are provided.
Sophie?
Yes. Is Tanya finished?
Yep.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Katrina, for the waste update and for acknowledging what people are going through. I'm really mindful of that and respectful of that, having lived through it. I'm not ignorant of the place that you're in about this stage in the disaster. So I'm not speaking with disrespect to those people at all. But I do want to acknowledge that actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking my parents used to say when we were little, their big saying was, you understood a country by the way they treated their prisoners. It was one of those old sayings. And I think that the world's changed where we're going to start judging countries about how they treat their waste. It's going to be the next step in how we kind of understand our moral responsibility to the way we kind of treat people and the environment. So I want to acknowledge your work in this space. I know it's really tricky when you're left with a house in a mess like this and all you want to do is get rid of it all as quickly as you can, but actually taking the time to do the best we can with this is going to be really significant. In one of the other roles, we did a bit of investigation into some countries where they're mining their landfills because they have run out of space and what's in the landfill is worth more than trying to recreate it. So the idea that we would rush and fill our landfill, which is probably going to be another huge problem within probably 5 years, not 50, is really untenable for an institution that is based around environmental protection. So I want to acknowledge your work while acknowledging the huge pressure and challenge that everyone's under. So thank you.
Thanks.
Can I just, and I also should clarify, I've just been reflecting on my response to Zan, so please let me elaborate. The Regional Council is not going to be clearing land. So we're still asking landowners to clear their own sites. What we have offered is to collect those piles of silt at vehicle entrances or turnaround bays, or we've asked for those scrapings to be brought together so that, and there are orchardists now, I see them busy scraping their land. The reason why we need to have a site that operators can drop off themselves is because that's what they want to do. Because there is absolute no sense in doing that work themselves, filling up a truck and then dumping it off for another truck to come along and pick it back up again and take it off. So really what the option that we have not offered initially is simply transport, collection and transport. It is not a function of this regional council. It is not something that we must do or should do. But the reason we stood it up so quickly was because there are orchardists now who, if they act quickly, will be able to salvage their properties. There are some that cannot, and that is a longer term prospect for recovery. But there are some that if they work quickly now, they can, and we wanted to help facilitate that. And so that's why we did what we did.
Thanks, Katrina. Jock, and then
Chair, I'd just like to get some clarity and simplicity around what happened with the flood. And I think the key thing for me that we need to communicate is that we went to bed on Monday night knowing we had a bad event coming. And the people who were going to be affected by that bad event were warned and evacuated. In fact, the bad event was twice as bad
as predicted.
as predicted. And so all sorts of stuff is going to happen in that consequence. But for me, the key thing is it was way, way greater than anyone could anticipate.
Thanks, Jock. Yera?
I just want to say something to Councillor Sears. My wife has to drive past every day, past the piano that my kids had their lessons on, and it breaks her heart. So are you going to say that I'm going to live next to my site and let it sit there until we finally find a solution so that we actually can get off that waste? You're doing irreparable damage to us by making those statements. That's all I'm going to say about it.
I think we can acknowledge, it is really tough for those directly impacted, but we can discuss that further
Just one more thing.
later on. Yeah.
So, Corinne, just in regards to the chip, what are we doing with the chip at the moment? Are we just chipping and will
At
we
the
solve it
moment-
later?
Yeah, at the moment, we're chipping and stockpiling. And so that's a lot of chip. But we are hoping to work with PanPac on that. Ultimately, that relies on PanPac to get their site up and running, and they have some significant challenges in terms of that. Because PanPac require their furnace to be running to run their site, and they need stuff to put in that furnace, we believe we can work together on that. But it is a usable product also at the end of that.
And is it being kept away from waterways currently?
Yes.
Okay.
This is an industrial area of Whakatu.
Good.
Tanya, do you have any further questions? Your hand's still up.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I just want to come back to the inquiry or the investigation that we might do. I know the council issued a press release not long after the event that there would be an investigation or an independent investigation into what happened. I think it's really critical. I understand that the information we received from the weather forecasters had this disaster at one level, the rainfall event at one level, and that our people did their modelling and felt that it was not great, but it wasn't going to be a problem for our infrastructure or those at risk we were going to ask, notify to move. But the reality is it didn't pan out that way. And so my question is, when we do this investigation, I think we need to thoroughly look at those pieces of information and whether in hindsight we would do something differently going forward. So, for example, did the forecasters modelling not get that right? Was our modelling robust enough? If we're not modelling with slash or woody debris as part of our modelling, then obviously we're not modelling the full impacts of the event, because it is clear as day to everybody who's walked around that there was a massive amount of woody debris and that must have had a big impact on the flooding. So I think we need to step through what happened in order to know what we need to change. So I want some clarity that is what we are going to be doing. And could someone please provide that for me?
Kia ora, Tanya, it's Piri speaking. Look, this is neither the time nor the place in terms of getting into the detail. There will be an inquiry, and that's probably going to happen at two levels, one at a national level and also at a regional level. Chris has indicated that there will be an inquiry in terms of an infrastructural review, but this is neither the time or the place to get into it. What you're posing there is part of the process of an inquiry moving forward.
Ka pai.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I think that's us. Thank you very much for your update and the clarity. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Can I just add something else, please, Chair?
Sure.
So those who have been presenting in terms of this overview, if you could call it that, of Cyclone Gabriel, and these are the executive team. I think from before and also through all of what happened, they've been sort of working through GECC, often back-to-back 12-hour shifts, and they've also been operating our emergency operating centre here within Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And I just want to say to councillors here and to acknowledge that this is a team that has been working back-to-back all the way through this. And it's only in more recent times that they've been able to resume their, I wouldn't call it BAU roles, but their executive roles. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't see a paper attachment there, but if you need a mover to receive the presentation, I'm happy to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Foley, all those who agree say aye.
Can I speak to it?
And yes, you can speak to it.
I think we ought to spend a moment speaking to this. It is the most calamitous event of our time, probably of our lifetime, in terms of these things, and particularly of this council, given our proximity to it and our involvement in it. So I will comment, and having sat around the table for 2 decades and have been aware of the risk of flooding, it's been a situation for me where I've needed to reflect on what has happened and how this is transacted. It's doubles down on me personally, having been affected directly by flooding, have been bobbing up and down in a flood stream. I know what that's like. I know the smell of the flood. I know how that impacts for the rest of your life. And that's what the people of this region are facing currently. Even more catastrophic and particularly saddening is the loss of life. And that's something that elevates this event well beyond any other when we lose people in this way. And we do bear some connection, at least, if not some responsibility, then it's worthy of very significant reflection. We've heard comments on, if you like, review and examination of the issues, perfectly appropriate for us to do, and no one is contesting or challenging that. It is my experience over 2 decades that people have tried their best to deal with this issue. Sometimes that's got lost in the midst of time, and reflecting on a comment from Tony Hopkins around this, I go back to a report that was written in 2001 in relation to our exposure to flood events. And I note a comment here from the 1938 flood in regard to the Esk Valley. Severe flooding was widespread after 3 days of heavy rain, with exceptional falls. In 3 days, a staggering 1,000 millimetres fell, 390 mil in 1 day. So this is not new. The region knows about it. Our very foundations and our wealth relies on that rainfall and its subsequent deposition of silt. The things that I think we need to take care of ourselves is to reflect not so much on, if you like, reflecting on the scale of the event, and it is catastrophic and it is an event that overwhelmed our structure, but I don't think we can always sit behind that as the answer. People will want answers to what happened when, and it's important for us to have fidelity around that, to tell it how it was, warts and all, because it occurs to me, and this is a reflection at 2 and 3 in the morning, having been on the phone with Craig Goodyear for 3 or 4 or 5 occasions on the Monday, and reflecting on that, my anxiety levels were growing, and certainly at 2 and 3 in the morning, walking out in an event like that, it was something that really struck me that this was major. How did we get on in that event? I think it would be fair to say we did our best, but now in hindsight, I think we could have done better, and we must do better. Being the chair of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee, I don't think our risk assessments were sufficient to pick this up. So that's something from a governance level, and that's where ultimately it lands at our governance level. We've got to find a better way to respond and deal with those emergencies. Clearly, we need to reflect on our flood protection and come up with new ways of protecting life and livelihoods. What we know now is that what we've done is not sufficient, and we've got to work so much harder to resolve that. I think we face and have faced and have exposed the vulnerabilities of our evacuation and early alert systems. The warning signs were there some time ago over the last term of council, and they have been exposed in this occasion. Our risk assessments of our lifelines was inadequate. Our risk assessments of our early warning alerts was inadequate, and we need to respond to that. And finally, Madam Chair, we need to do so with an open mind, not with the intent of pointing finger at any individuals, or as Tania referred to as a heat-seeking missile. It's not about that. It's about recognising that we do have vulnerabilities, we did have vulnerabilities, and it's our job as the governors over the next 3 years to correct that and make sure we do better for the communities we currently serve and those yet to come.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Councillor Foley, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the team for the presentation. That's not just the team at the top of the table, but the rest of the team throughout this building and the region. You gave us just a snapshot of, as much information as you could in that time. There's a huge thirst at the moment for information, and that's probably only going to continue to grow in the coming weeks and months. So just be aware of that. But I acknowledge the scale of this event. It's been well covered today. Acknowledge our own colleagues that have been, impacted quite severely around this table. What motivates me is that we can always do better, and we do need to learn from it. And I guess that's certainly the communication, the contact I'm getting from our community, from our region, is that we must learn and we must do better. And so that's I guess the motivation for me, and hopefully all my colleagues here from this point on, is what can we do to encourage them, to give them the trust and faith that they need to have in this organisation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Foley. We do have to move on, team. So we will head over to the next item, which is the triennial agreement.
So, Chair, we can take the paper as read,
Right.
And Desi is to be there in terms of questions, but also to cover any other commentary that we need to add in explanation to this.
Yeah, maybe just a brief overview.
Sure.
Thank you.
Very brief. Tēnā koutou, thank you, Council. So the triennial agreement is a statutory requirement. All councils are required to adopt one by usually the 1st of March following the election. This was on the agenda for the council meeting on the 22nd of February, which was subsequently cancelled. So we've carried it over to this meeting.
We've largely taken the agreement from 3 years ago and we've updated it with new priorities that were set at the Regional Leaders Forum back in November. And probably of interest is that we did check that they still were appropriate post the cyclone, and I think they hold up well. Those 5 being regional spatial planning, collaboration, climate change and water, transport and housing. And the only other sort of substantive change that we've made to the agreement from the previous term was to add an inclusion of a principle recognising the obligations under Te Tiriti. And then there's just a little bit, there's the 5 primary signatories to the agreement, which is Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings, Napier, us and Wairoa, and Rangitikei and Taupo, and all due to either have adopted it or are due to very soon.
Thank you, Desi. Are there any questions? Councillor Harding.
Sorry, Chair, not really a question, more of an observation. Look, I mean, it's obvious, but it bears stating that this is a business as usual piece of, it's an agreement that is part of business as usual. It was initiated in our normal course pre-cyclone. I think largely it does hold up. I do want to observe as having a particular interest in the Climate Action Joint Committee, being one of the representatives for the council, that I have some questions about whether that committee will survive the regional recovery structure that is bound to become clear to us in the next couple of weeks. So that maybe some detail that doesn't survive, and there's some of that detail I'm deeply interested in, but we recognise that we're dealing with this now in the context of now the prospect of a regional recovery agency, which we have to have regard to in this, and I believe one or more of my colleagues has more to say on that and some suggestions as to how we might deal with this in the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a conversation to come, but a good point to raise. Thank you.
Actually, no, don't worry about it.
No? Councillor says no? No other comment or question? I do have a request for a resolution to add on to this, not so much the terms of reference itself. And the resolution reads, and this is for matter of continuing the pace in which the Regional Recovery Agency or coordination can move, but allows some coherence between the councils. So the resolution reads to approve the triennial agreement subject to the Mayors and Chairs Forum convening as a matter of priority to prepare and agree an addendum to the triennial agreement to ensure that agency and decision-making over the recommended recovery program and implementation remains with the relevant local authority with primary legislative responsibility for the actions and activities involved. B, the purpose, principles and protocols, including as to communication, collaboration and coordination, along with no surprises are applied to the Delivery Oversight Board and Matariki Governance Group in implementing the recovery functions of those entities. And C, the dispute resolution provisions apply as between the member local authorities and those entities. So Leanne, could you please, for clarification, put that onto the screen? Right, could we have any discussion around those, that resolution proposed? Come up. Just make sure you're up. Okay, while the text's been sorted out, councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just following on from my previous comments, and just I'll have an introduction to this proposed amendment to the resolution. So Councillor Williams proposed this amendment, and I think he's done a fantastic job. The purpose of the amendment is just to provide a linkage and assurance through to this new proposed regional development agency, agency being a term that Councillor Williams is not too comfortable with, because it connotes action and delivery as opposed to coordination. So what we are contemplating is that we will shortly have coordination at a regional level supported jointly by all of the local authorities, the 5 authorities in Hawke's Bay and central government, to lead and to coordinate through our recovery response. What we want to ensure, and use through this, through the suggestion of the way that we support the triennial agreement, is that we're just leaving the opportunity for discussion and clarity around the continuing role of this council as in delivery for all those aspects that are in our purview, and particularly those that have regional, pan-regional reach. So I think this resolution does that admirably. Thank you.
Any other comment? Add on. Councillor Curtin.
Well, Madam Chair, I just wonder if we could have some clarity about the connection of the triennial agreement and the recovery coordinator in terms of its. I mean, there's no direct link other than parties to both are around that particular table. I wonder if it's worth, given that there's no great assurance, and the recommendation of the amendment seeks assurance, that in fact we craft a letter to perhaps the relevant minister, who's our local MP Stuart Nash, as well as copies to the respective mayors, highlighting that particular addendum and making everyone clear as to the expectation from it.
Yes, we can do that if we choose to. Yes. Any other comments? There are none. Who would like to move the amended
I'm happy
resolution?
to so move.
Thank you. And secondly, Councillor Sandbake. Any comment further?
No further comment. Thank you. No further comment.
There are none. Those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carry. Thank you very much.
So, Madam Chair, you're happy to write that letter?
Draft. Yes, we'll get one of the staff to draft. We're on to item 6, the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy Joint Committee Terms of Reference.
Gavin will present this paper.
Gavin. Kia ora, Gavin.
Take this paper as read, but in summarised format. This one? Yeah. Take this paper as read, but in summarising it, you may recall that just prior to Christmas, this committee did consider a terms of reference for establishing a new committee, which would be in partnership with Napier City Council, Hastings District Council and 3 PSGEs. The terms of reference was then endorsed by this council with a tweak or two. It was then subsequently agreed to by Napier City Council and Hastings in the following days, but with some extra tweaks. So that meant, as first cab off the rank, we now need to circle back round and catch up. And essentially this is the paper that presents the terms of reference as adopted by both Napier and Hastings councils previously. And hopefully this is kind of more of a formality than a re-debate and revisiting of whether or not a joint committee should be established. One further comment to add to that is We are, as a project team around the future development strategy, we are acutely aware that we've had Cyclone Gabrielle impact us, and whether or not the rules of engagement around developing a future development strategy remain as it was late last year compared to what now lies in front of us, that is a thread of conversations that we will need to have amongst ourselves and also with MFA officials and possibly ministers as well, as to what kind of reprieve or relaxation we may get from the legislative requirements and timeframes.
Thank you, Gavin, and I suspect will be like this across many joint committees in
Indeed.
terms of where to next.
Yep.
Yeah. Are there any questions around this terms of reference? This has been our third time? Second. Yeah. Councillor Sears.
I'm happy with the minor changes and happy to move if there's no other questions.
Can I please have a second? Councillor McIntosh. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you, Gavin.
There you go.
Item number 7, the report and recommendations from Māori Committee. Who would like to lead this?
Well, you have one of our co-chairs here. You have a choice, Chair.
Mike.
I'll defer to my rangatira over here next to me, Madam Chair.
Kiri.
Aye. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Chair. If you could take the paper as read, there's quite an addendum to the back of that in terms of the charter and the terms of reference, but open for any questions, Chair.
Fantastic. And the main recommendations are around the nominations or just noting the nominations? Yes. Noting the nominations. Fantastic. Any questions? There are none. Fine. Right. Could I please have a mover of the paper? I'm happy to move. Second, Councillor Fenwick. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Affixing the common seal. I'm happy to move this if there are no questions. Councillor Foley. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried.
Appreciate it. It's retrospective to the 10th of Feb.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're now a dangerous man.
We will now move into public excluded.
So moved.
And second, thank you. All those who agree say